You moved.
Okay. All right. Here we go. I'm going to grab that microphone from you just a second. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out and spending this gorgeous Tuesday evening with us. My name is Amali, and I'm the events director here at Books Are Magic. We are so excited to have Elizabeth Hand and Sarah Weinman with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Liz's newest horror novel, A Haunting on the Hill. Before we get into all of that, however, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. First off, we will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Liz will be around to sign and personalize your books at the alcove next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And lastly, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of A Haunting on the Hill online using the link in the live stream description. All right, let's get into this. As I'm sure you all know by now, A Haunting on the Hill brings us back to Shirley Jackson's much-loved and much-feared Hill House, where Holly, our new protagonist, is staying to rehearse her new play. Of course, as the days and weeks go by, Holly and the rest of her troupe begin to notice some alarming disturbances, and we can only read in terror as the house, with the horrors that live in its wooden beams and cut-down tree stumps, manipulates this new cast of doomed characters. Liz Hand is the author of Hookalua Road, named a notable book of 2022 by the New York Times, and more than 19 cross-genre novels and collections of short fiction. Her work has received the Shirley Jackson Award 3 times, the World Fantasy Award 4 times, and the Nebula Award twice. She divides her time between Maine and London. As I mentioned earlier, Sarah Weinman joins Liz in conversation tonight. Sarah is the author of Scoundrel and the Real Lolita, and the editor most recently of Unspeakable Acts, True Tales of Crime, Murder, Deceit, and Obsession, and Evidence of Things Unseen, True Crime in an Era of Reckoning. Sarah writes the crime column for the New York Times Book Review and lives in New York City and Northampton, Massachusetts. All right, that's all from me. Without any further delay, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Liz and Sarah.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for coming out tonight to hear Liz. And what we're going to do is start with a short reading.
Yeah, I'm going to do something not too long. Thank you all for coming. It's so nice to see people. Thank you. Everyone from Mulholland is here. Old friends, new friends, friends I haven't met yet. So this is going to be kind of a truncated section of the book, but this is when the group is gathered at Hill House. Can you hear me okay? Does this work? And they're having their first read-through of the play, which is called Witching Night, and I've kind of cut it. But the characters are Holly, the playwright, her girlfriend Nisa, who is a singer who has written a lot of the music for the show, their friend Stevie, who's kind of running sound, but he's also playing the part of Thomason the demon dog, and Amanda, who is an actress of a certain age, and sort of a prima donna, although she's kind of fallen on hard times. So they are rehearsing the play, and now we're sort of coming into it in the middle. So Nisa sang the devil's lines in a low, insinuating near whisper, her pure soprano twisting the words into something unearthly and foreboding, a barely contained rage that might erupt. I'd heard her perform the original ballad before, but still, the hairs on my neck stood up. Amanda's replies as Elizabeth sounded thin and unconvincing, more spoken than sung. Yet that worked in her favor. Her Elizabeth was out of her element, vulnerable. As she sang, Nisa's voice filled the room like water fills a crystal tumbler. For an instant, the shadows withdrew from the windows, allowing hazy light to show through the glass. I felt myself relax. The eye is Holly. The play was working. Better than that, it was casting its own spell, one we each had a hand in. It's not just going to be okay. It's going to be great, I thought. So then we're going to cut ahead, and Stevie is reaching for the hand of Amanda, one of the actors. Stevie reached for her hand, his eyebrows lifted as his lips parted softly, waiting for her reply. But Amanda wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the fireplace. From behind the fieldstone chimney breast came a scrabbling noise, the frantic scratching of nails or claws, followed by a clatter like gravel falling from a great height. Stevie jumped to his feet as cinders exploded out onto the grate. The scrabbling grew louder and more frenzied. Stevie swayed as though drunk, his hands clawing at his ears. I tried to stand too, but my legs wouldn't move. The damper, I thought. It can't get past the damper. But the housekeeper had opened the damper. With a kneeling shriek, a dark mass tumbled onto the hearth, a shape with too many legs and too many eyes. A charred log spun out onto the floor next to it, and Stevie barely managed to kick it back toward the fireplace. The writhing shape emitted a high-pitched squeal, revealing its long legs and equally long ears, sparks that I had mistaken for eyes. Its lips peeled back in blackened petals. Nisa screamed as it leapt from the hearth, bumping into her chair. Stevie grabbed a fireplace poker. "Don't hurt it!" shrieked Nisa. The black hair darted from the room. I stared after it, feeling like I had after listening to Macy Lee's story, horrified and drunk, almost drugged. I'll stop there.
I mean, even if I hadn't read the book already, I would just be like standing on my edge of my seat going, what is going to happen next?
Well, that's why you always want to make sure that you clean your chimney annually.
So I did warn you that the first question that I was going to ask you was probably the most obvious one, which is, how on earth did you get involved in this project? Because obviously the first that I'd heard of it was getting a publicity email saying, Elizabeth Hand has written a book in the Shirley Jackson universe. And I thought, well, I'm in, but what?
That's kind of what I felt, too. I had actually met or been in touch with Murray Weiss, the agent for the Jackson estate, about 9 years ago. And he and I were talking then about doing essentially like a sequel to The Haunting of Hill House. So I think there were two other writers who were talking about doing it. But for various reasons, they set it aside. I think it's because it was early days with the TV series. And then during the pandemic, Murray, out of the blue, got back in touch with me and said, what do you think? Should we get the gang together again? And I said, yeah, sure. So he and I had several Zoom meetings with Lawrence, who is Shirley Jackson's oldest son and the executor for her estate. And we kind of tossed around some ideas and came up with something and pitched it to the wonderful people at Mulholland. And then the rest is history. But it was like, yeah, Shirley Jackson, Hill House, no pressure.
How far along was the project initially before, I guess, everybody kind of stepped aside and then got back to it?
It was not very far, and it was completely different. I had written maybe a chapter or two, and the only thing that remained the same was the name of the real estate agent. So that's like the only part of the book that remained.
Things to keep.
Yeah, it was a good name. So I kept that, and the rest of it, no, I don't even really remember. I didn't get very far with it in terms of thinking because, before I committed to something, I wanted to know it was going to move forward. So
I think what also struck me, and it's very clear early on in the book, is that this is not a direct sequel to Haunting of Hill House. You don't have Eleanor Vance's descendants come back to the house for, I don't know, one last stand or something like that. I mean, the house is the continuing character, but obviously you envisioned a very different type of story. And I wondered how you arrived at how you were going to essentially connect the original book with your book. Because to me, I think what's clear is that it's a Liz Hand book in the Shirley Jackson universe. Mm-hmm. And that's very different. And we'll get into that a little bit later on about the complications of essentially writing to somebody else's vision. But it's also very clear that your vision is in here too.
Yeah, and I had told Murray and Lawrence early on when we were talking about different ideas, and they were saying, well, maybe we could do like a prequel. And I said, no. And they said, well, maybe we could have, somebody, a descendant of Eleanor, one of the characters, all these years later. I said, no. I said, anything like that, I'm just going to be asking for trouble. I said, I cannot do anything that's going to be directly tied to that story. It's perfect. And I told them, I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write an Elizabeth Hand novel. It's going to be set in Hill House. And Hill House itself is a character to me. And I felt like that was enough of a character to carry through. So for the rest of it, it just, we kind of talked about different ideas. And I said, what about this, having a group of actors come and do that and being there. And it's sort of, actors are kind of, they can be kind of like a pressure cooker to begin with. So so you put them in Hill House and hijinks ensue. It's just, fun.
I was about to say I thought that Lawrence was an actor, but I'm mistaking it. He was a musician, but I feel like musicians and actors kind of operate in the same universe too.
Yeah, he was a jazz musician, yeah.
So tell me more about the 4 characters who we're introduced to tonight in the reading and who they are, why they're in this troupe, how they end up at Hill House, and what it was like to kind of bring them there and keep them there.
Well, keeping there wasn't a problem. It's like you check in and you don't check out. But Holly is I was a failed playwright, so I kind of grafted some of my, experience and anxiety onto her. She's a more successful playwright than I ever was. But so this is kind of her big chance. And Nisa, who's younger, and it's really the most talented of the group, very talented folk singer and performer and writer in her own right. Holly's girlfriend, so she's there, and she feels that, her contributions to the play that they've been working on, which Holly adapted from an actual Jacobean play that's really boring. Nisa feels like her contributions are not being, really given full credit. And then there's Stevie, who's a good friend of theirs, who was a child actor who endured some trauma when he was younger. He was a very successful child actor on the stage, but he stayed in touch with them. And then there's Amanda, who is the actor of a certain age, who was involved in an unfortunate incident during a rehearsal for Medea, in which she played the title role. So those are the 4 characters who are there. And basically, once they got there, Holly and Nisa are upstate on a long weekend, driving around, and Holly is off on her own while Nisa's still sleeping, and she drives up this random road and comes upon Hill House and thinks, wow, she's received this $10,000 grant, which to her is a huge amount of money, to do whatever she wants with. And she's like, I'm going to rent this place. And this is where we will rehearse the play, and we'll work on it, and we'll, develop it. So, and my friend Tom Koash, who's a colleague of mine at Stone Coast, which is the MFA program where I teach along with Robert, and Tom Koash is a playwright, and so I talked to him a lot. I said, okay, how does this work? How does this process of developing something, what would happen here? What would the actors do? And he was like, basically, when the playwright is working something in development, all the actors want to do is like make sure they get more lines than they already have. And he said, so you got to make sure that's in there. He said, when I've written plays and I get to the end of the day and, they all retire to the bar and I'm there rewriting everything and they're all like, hey, how about this scene? So
It did seem that even though there are 4 major characters in the book, that there seemed to be like exponential number of secrets and resentments among all of them, and that it felt like you had 2 on stage and there'd be like 3 conflicts going on. And I just wondered too, like, what was it like to kind of marinate in the anxieties and the insecurities, but also the joys of making theater? And I think that's like a real important part of this book, is just what it's like to just in the nitty gritty make art.
Yeah, and I love that. I've written a lot about making art, and I've written about performers. Wilding Hall is about a folk acid folk band in the 70s. Illyria is about a group of high school students doing Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, and there have been other things as well. It's just something I return to again and again. But with this one, I wanted to get the joy there, but because it's a spooky book, I wanted to lean more into the bad stuff. So, and editor, Helen, who's not here tonight because she had a family commitment, she really had me dig deeply into the character. She really did. I mean, I felt like the initial draft, and I think she did too, it was like the house was all there. All the spooky stuff, the scary stuff at the house, that was all there. And the characters were there. But she said, you really need to really dig deep into these people and what are they doing to each other and why are they doing this and why is, how is the house finding a wedge to get into each one of them and into the, not into each one individually, but also into their relationships with the other people. So she helped me a huge amount with that.
To get back to the whole, writing a Liz Hand novel in the Shirley Jackson universe, how much did you feel that you had to reread Hill House or reread other Shirley Jackson books and stories to kind of get into that mindset as you were working on it? Or did you just go from memory or go from sense of just, I don't want to even have it uppermost in my mind. I just want to be free to create my own world?
I kind of had to do that. Although I've read Hill House, I don't know, 6 or 8 times over the years. And I read it early on when this project was, getting started. And then I read it again, highlighting everything to try to figure out the architecture of Hill House. But other than that, I did not, and those of you who are writers or, maybe in other arts may, have this experience, the kind of anxiety of influence. And I find it's very easy for me to fall under the spell of another writer. It's very easy to do that when I'm actually writing something. So what I've learned over the years is that it's just a good idea for me to only read really bad books, basically, when I'm in the process of writing a novel. No, but I have to kind of stay away from anything that's going to touch on what I do. So, I'll read a lot of nonfiction, and I read books for review and for teaching and stuff like that. But yeah, when I finished it, and just very recently, I went on kind of a Shirley Jackson binge. I just did a feature on her for The Guardian in the UK, and so I kind of went back and read or reread everything, and that was great. But I could never have done that before I did this book because that would have, I did not want to do a pastiche of Shirley Jackson. And the only part of this book that really stylistically harkens to that deliberately is the little prologue at the beginning and the end. So
yeah, I mean that to me was the only obvious callback to Hill House and to Jackson's writing in general. But tell me more about revisiting Jackson's work more recently for this piece. Just were there any surprises? Was there anything that maybe you had a different reaction to when you read them early on and now coming back to them or see them in a new way?
Yeah, well, I had never read Hangs a Man, which was her second
that's
novel.
One of my favorites.
Which is great. And so that was a really strange, great book. But then I reread We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which I've read before, I don't know, 3 or 4 times over the years. I first read all of her books when I was a kid. I was about 11 or 12. And my mom...
It's a very formative age to read Shirley Jackson.
Yeah, exactly. My mother brought all these Shirley Jackson paperbacks from the library book sale, and, and I'd already read her short fiction. I'd read Life Among the Savages and stuff like that when I was really quite young. But I just devoured these other ones, The Bird's Nest and Haunting of Hill House, and We've Always Lived in the Castle. But reading Castle again, I thought, this book is just such a work of genius and funny and strange. And also just reading that, and then, of course, The Lottery, it's just the way she exposes how there's this thin veneer of civility that covers us, humans in our interactions. And it cracks so easily, and just this brutal violence comes out, people turning on each other, neighbors, friends, whatever, which obviously famously happens in The Lottery, but it's, spoiler alert, it's something that plays a role in We've Always Lived in the Castle, too. And I thought it felt so timely to me with everything that we've been seeing with, acts of violence. And even where I live in rural Maine, and these small towns are having being Zoom bombed by all these people making hate speech just coming out of nowhere in these little towns like North Bennington, where Jackson lived and wrote. So it felt that particular book felt very timely to me.
It also was interesting reading A Haunting on the Hill this year, when it seems like we're in an interesting time with respect to art made out of other people's source material. And I'm thinking of the Barbie movie. I'm thinking of Denise Mina's The Second Murderer, which is her version of of Philip Marlowe. And so I also just wonder what challenges there were generally of making sure that your vision came through and your creative efforts came through, and that it didn't fall into some like IP trap.
The IP trap. Well, I did have the permission of the estate, so I felt like that was fine. But they really did give me free rein, and there was never any kind of oversight where they said, "Oh, you need to do this," or Shirley would never have said that. There was none of that at all. And I had a really supportive editorial team at Mulholland, and Helen just really, and Danielle, my agent, people who read it early on gave me feedback that was really helpful. So I felt like I was doing okay. And when I wasn't, they were there to, set me on the path again. But I never really felt like I was, I think that there were beats in the story that deliberately echoed those in The Haunting of Hill House, and there were thematic things that I wanted to put in there. There's some Easter eggs, there's some obvious things there. If you've read the book, you'll be like, "Oh, I get that. I know what that is." But I wanted it to be a standalone, so that if you had not read the book, you could read it and enjoy it, and then ideally go and read The Haunting of Hill House and go to the source material.
Was there anything that you put in unconsciously and only realized after the fact in like later edits?
About that
were more, I guess, hearkening to Jackson.
To be honest, I don't think so. There was one line that, and I don't think she'd mind me saying this, but there was one line that my editor asked me to put into the book, and she said, "Can you put in a line to this effect?" And I said, "I don't know if I really want to do that." And she said, "No, do that, because it'll harken back to the original." And I was like, okay. And I did it, and, it was fine. And then went into the copy edit, and it went out to, Murray and Lawrence. And Lawrence loved it. He was the one I was most concerned about pleasing. And then I got this email from him, and he said, I hope you won't mind, but there's this one line on page, and he said, "Would you take that out, because it just feels too on the nose. It feels too much like what my mother did." And I said, "I'm happy to take that out." So, and I did, and it was because I really did, I wanted to make a real effort to step away from that, and he was, and that was the only thing that he said anything about. So, and just to be clear, Helen did an incredible job. This book would never have been in the state it is now. It just wouldn't have. I could give you each a first draft of it, or a second or third draft, and you could read it, and you could decide for yourself. It would never have been as turned out the way that it did without her, editorial acumen. And so it was great. And I love being edited, so that, working with a good editor.
Writers who don't love being edited, we should be suspicious of.
Yeah, Josh, others. I do. I really, it's such a cool collaborative process, and and they think of things that I don't think of. So, and at first I'm really mad. I'm like, no, and then I think about it. I was like, oh yeah, you're right.
I also couldn't help thinking of particularly Holly and Nisa in the context of some of my own favorite books of yours, which are the Cass Neary books. And I wondered if Cass or characters like that figured as you were creating the world of your Hill House. Like how, just out of curiosity, if Cass Neary showed up at Hill House, how would she react?
I don't know if Hill House would win in that case. I don't know. That'd be a smackdown. But actually, I was thinking about Cass Neary with Holly because she is somebody like Cass who had this early promise and then she never earned out. So I actually was thinking about that. And when I was thinking about it early on, I thought, do I want to do that? Do I want to have another character like that? And I said, yeah, because it'll be totally different. And I felt like it was, except that, I have failed at a lot of things, so I feel like I can mine that material endlessly in characters in my work. So I felt like, yeah, I could do that again.
One thing you didn't mention in the excerpt, but which I also found personally and professionally fascinating, is that Nisa writes and refashions murder ballads. And I wondered why murder ballads, but also why not? That's such a interesting particular road to travel down for her and thus for the reader. And what was it like just, I don't know, listening to a lot of murder ballads or putting that all together?
Yeah, well, that was kind of a way into the material for me because I thought I want to go into Hill House, but I need something that's going to be something that I really love, that I care about, that I'm interested in, that I know a little bit about, but maybe not that much about. And I was, with my partner in London, and there's, all this reading material in the bathroom. And one of the things was like a book of child ballads. And so I ended up taking it home with me and reading it. I was like, these things are so great, but they're so freaking creepy. It's all of these awful things happening to, almost always to women, often to children. And a lot of a supernatural element to many of them. So I thought, this is perfect. And I thought, all right, well, she's going to have a girlfriend, and her girlfriend's going to be a folk singer, and she's going to do this. And I'll make it work. I'll just have to kind of make it do.
I think I was also struck by them because certainly coming from my vantage point, covering and writing true crime, that murder ballads were one of the original ways into this genre. So it felt almost to me like this was a subtle commentary on what's going on.
Actually, yeah, it was. And also the play, the original play that Holly's play is based on was a play called The Witch of Edmonton, which was written in the late 1500s. And it was based on a true crime, a woman named Elizabeth Sawyer, an older woman, who was accused of being a witch and ended up being executed for it. And maybe 10 or 20 years after that, somebody wrote a chapbook about her. And then this group of playwrights got together and they wrote this play about her that became it's actually not a good play, but it was pretty successful. So it was a true crime that was going through these different variations, and they had Satan and a demon dog and all of this stuff. They were like, rustic mechanicals and all of these weird, like, faux Shakespearean things in it. That it was like two stories totally grafted together. So I just got rid of all that stuff. I just kept the demon dog because that was the cool part.
I have a couple more questions before turning it over. I wanted to hear more just about Amanda and Stevie because Stevie's a child actor and Amanda we meet when she is, as you delicately put it, an actor of later years. And I think just the compare and contrast of coming to acting when they did at different ages, but also different success levels, was really interesting to me. And I just wondered, getting into a little bit more of their particular anxieties and insecurities and bringing that into the house.
Yeah, well, everybody in the book has baggage that they're bringing into the house. And Stevie was a child actor, and he was groomed and preyed upon by somebody else in the play, and obviously that took a real toll on him throughout his life. So, and it kind of poisoned his attitude towards the theater. And this, unfortunately, is something that maybe happens, I hope, less now, but has happened certainly in the past. And Amanda is somebody who was pretty successful, a working actor in theater and film for a number of years, but now she's middle-aged. She's like my age, so she's in her mid-60s, and it's harder for her to get work. I have friends in the UK who are my age and are still doing it. They're still out there. They're still, doing what they can to make it. And so, and it's very, it's very inspiring. They love what they do, and they're just going to keep doing it. So I wanted Amanda to be kind of more messed up than that, so she, because that's more fun. But she's somebody who feels like this is a real chance for her. Nobody's really come knocking on her door for a little while. So she comes back. But she has her own baggage because she's been subjected to this ageism in the theater, which is a very, a real problem, as it is in some other arts. But anything where you're literally like face forward, and if you're a woman, that's a very, very difficult place to be.
Absolutely. So the last thing I wanted to ask you before turning it over to you all is just that this book comes after Hokloa Road, which was a thriller in Hawaii, and the Book of Lamps and Banners, and another Castaneri novel, and essentially that you don't repeat yourself and never have. And so what's next for you? Where is the Elizabeth Hand universe taking you after you've run the entire gamut, subject-wise and tone-wise and genre-wise? Yeah.
Can I talk about that? Well, I'm just, I'm just, in the process of I'm going to be doing two new books with Mulholland, and one is going to be a sequel to Hokaloa Road. That's going to be the second book. But the first one that I'm working on is a queer reimagining of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca.
Okay, I'm sold.
Only with with murder. A lot of it. And it's set in 1920s London during the era of the Bright Young Things. So there's lots of kind of historical characters who get to make an appearance, and two characters who are not, the action it's different from Rebecca. It has to be because that's still under copyright. So it's, but it takes place in the era before, Rebecca would have married Max de Winter. So it's these two young women, one of whom will go on to become sort of the Mrs. Danvers character, and the other one the Rebecca character, who are, have known each other since they were quite young and are lovers, and they are having to make their way through, London, sometimes cross-dressing, sometimes not. And there's also a female police detective who gets involved as well. So it's cool, it's fun, and I think I hope it'll be fun. Is that right? Yeah, fun.
It also must be another gear switch to go back into the 20s after essentially doing a more, quote, contemporary book.
I have a very short attention span. So, I mean, it's true, I had maybe 15 years ago, I had an editor tell me, you need to just keep doing this, maybe longer than that. You need to do the same thing more than once. You have to gain traction. You have to start doing the same thing. So I was like, okay. So that was when I started doing the Castaneri books. But in between them, I was like, I wrote a young adult novel about Rimbaud, and I wrote Wilding Hall. So I would write these other things too, just because I'd like to do a lot of different things. And after having done it now for literally half my life and having done so many different things, I think people are more open to it. They know that's what I do, then I'm going to do something different. And so it's fun, and it's a challenge. I hope it keeps me fresh. I'm not repeating myself. I hope. Am I repeating myself? I hope. Am I repeating myself? No. Okay, good.
If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand, and then I'll repeat it back into the mic. Yes, in the back. So let me see if I can paraphrase your question, which is that in the original Shirley Jackson book, there was events in Liz's book, there are events, and in between roughly about 60 or 70 years, there were other events that are mentioned in your book, but only alluded to. And is that something that you made up, or is that something that, I guess, I don't know, came out of the ether?
I just made it up. Yeah, I did. I made it all up. It was like 60 years have gone by. So I thought, well, no one's been in that house. Nobody knows what's been going on. I know, but no one's been there but me. So, yeah, so those that kind of bits of backstory that were in there. And that was kind of fun. You know, I didn't, I could have done a lot more with it, but then it would have just gone off into, you know, outer space. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to kind of think, oh, yeah, what else could have happened here in the last 60 years?
Yes.
So in Shirley Jackson's original, Eleanor and Theo kind of have a really charged, potentially queer, depending on how you want to read it, relationship. Does that at all inspire your decision to have Holly and her girlfriend in the house?
So the question is that in the original novel, that Eleanor and Theo had this charged relationship, which could be coded as queer, and did that influence you in any way in terms of the relationship between Holly and Nisa?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I always thought the whole relationship between Eleanor and Theodora was just, you know, there was this very powerful homoerotic element to it. And Dora lives with a person who is never described as being a woman, but reads it as though her partner is a woman. And so I thought, but I thought, you know, Jackson writing 60 years ago was something that I don't know whether she wanted it to be part of the story or not, but she couldn't really put that out there. But I thought, well, I can. So it was just a matter of fact thing. I literally never thought, I just was like, yeah, it's going to be two women and, you know, they're lovers, partners in a relationship, and it's not going to be a big deal. That's because, you know, this is 2023, which is roughly when the book takes place.
I mean,
it takes place now.
When Hill House came out, it's like you had The Price of Salt, and it was a pseudonym. You had Spring Fire, where the protagonist had to have a sad ending, and most of the queer novels did not have happy endings. So how, even if she had thought to code it queer, where would she have been
Right.
able to go with it?
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
So as you say, the house is a character in the book, and having had the chance to read Early Coffee, the rooms are so well evoked, and you feel like you're walking through it. I'm curious what kinds of architectural research you did when working on this.
Yeah, I was.
So the question was
I'm sorry.
about, no, it's all right, I'm
Yeah.
repeating it for the stream.
Yeah.
The question was about what architectural research that Liz would have done for this book, because the house itself is so evocative and the rooms are so, I guess, specific.
Yeah, I went through the book, like I was saying, and I highlighted everything, and I drew my own plot, you know, like a floor plan. I had in my mind what it looked like because she describes it so vividly from the exterior. But it was important to get the interior right because it's very bewildering in the original. You know, that there's rooms. It's much bigger inside than out. You know, there's just rooms and doors and windows and things. But I asked Lawrence at one point, you know, I said, do you have any, did your mother like do anything, sketches or things of Hill House? And there were a few that were actually in Ruth Franklin's biography of Shirley Jackson, but he sent me
remember that.
scans of, and that was amazing to have those to look at. I mean, even thinking about it kind of gives me goosebumps. Really, because I was like, wow, it was like, they were very simple. They were not, you know, very elaborate or professional. They didn't look like architectural drawings, but you could see, you know, house and tower. And so I had that, and that was really what I made use of and would go back and look at again and again because I felt like, oh, this is how she saw it, okay? And it was just, if you would look at it, it was quite simple. But even that, thinking, okay, it's simple, but what can I project there? She projected one thing, but I tried to maintain the integrity of the house, so because otherwise people would be, the red room wasn't there. Yeah. That was the green room. And I thought, oh, this is going to be really confusing because there's going to definitely be people who know this book by heart who are going to tell me, it's like, there was never a window there. So I wanted to make sure that I covered myself with that.
We have time for one last question. No, you can take it.
I know writing scary stuff can be really fun for the writer. Did you scare yourself at one or two places?
So the question was, did Liz scare herself while writing this in one or two places?
I didn't really scare myself, but it actually felt like a dark place to inhabit. It really did. It felt like being in there with these characters and knowing, I knew what was going to happen. They didn't know, but I knew. And it was actually kind of a dark place to be for a while, for some time, for a couple of months. So it wasn't so much that I felt scared by what happened, but it was very unsettling.
Well, unsettling is the mood that the book will leave you with once you read it. And I just want to say, if you haven't had a chance to read it, please buy it. It's wonderful. And Liz, thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank all of you.
Yes, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. Thank you to Sarah for moderating such a wonderful conversation. And of course, thank you to Liz for celebrating this launch with us. So just a few quick reminders before we wrap up. If you're still with us on the live stream, you can buy a copy of A Haunting on the Hill by clicking the link in the live stream description. For those of you with us in the store, if you haven't purchased it already, we have plenty of additional copies available at the register. Get it for yourself, for your friends, for your mom and neighbor and all the rest. Liz will be around to sign and personalize your books. That's going to happen at the little table where my coworkers are pointing to right now. It'll make a little more sense in a minute, but we ask that you please gather your personal belongings, line up down the center aisle, and curve around to the wall. We also have a few copies of Sarah's books, Scoundrel and Lolita, which are fantastic and unsettling in very different ways. So I highly recommend checking those out too. Okay, that's all. Let's give these two one last round of applause. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Oh, I can have my water.
And I have